Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us here at Carrick Publishing for our launch of Auntie Beers, which is a collection of short stories by Catherine Astolfo. I'd like to start by introducing Catherine, and I have a few notes, so bear with me. Catherine has always been a writer. She remembers writing her first short story in grade 3 for her classmates. Much later, her short stories and poems were published in a number of Canadian presses. And the day after retiring from education, she started finishing her books. She retired from teaching after a successful 34 years in education. So congratulations for that, Kathy. That's wonderful. That's really an accomplishment. She can recall writing fantasy stories for her classmates going way back. Catherine, for those of you who don't know, has won 2 short story awards. The first in 2012 for her story, What Katie Did, and the second in 2018 for The Outlier, which appeared in one of the Mesdames of Mayhem's publications, which I think it was 13 Claws, if I'm not mistaken. And that is an absolutely brilliant and very dark story. And it's really gorgeous. Please read that. She has 4 novels in her Emily Taylor mystery series: The Bridgeman, Victim, Legacy, and Seventh Fire. And her standalone novel, Sweet Caroline, is a psychological suspense. It hit the top 10 of Amazon Canada on its first day of release, and I'm not surprised. I thoroughly enjoyed that book, Kathy. So please look for that as well. The novel has since been republished independently. She's the author of a novella series, the Kira Callahan Mysteries. The first 2 novellas have also been republished independently, so you can find them. And she also co-authored a book of short stories with her uncle Tom Sullivan, who is here and is going to be speaking with us today. And that is called Uncle Tom's Gabbin, and that's a Carrick Publishing collection. So I'm really proud of that. Thank you, guys. I have to give
He
Carrick
gets
Publishing a
full
little pat on the
credit.
back now and again too. So bear with me. She recently published a book called The Grand Art of Murder. And that's a novel with a dash of humor and a keep 'em guessing plot and a quirky ghost. Her most recent book is a collection of connected short stories. In other words, one story leads into the other. They are entitled Auntie Beers, and they're about women and some men who are born in Ireland during difficult times. They emigrate to Canada and are faced with the Depression, yet their wry humor prevails. This is a really wonderful book, Auntie Beers. I'm going to ask Kathy to tell us a little bit about it. But before I do, I just want to let you know, Kathy's a past president of the Crime Writers of Canada. She's also a member of Sisters in Crime, Toronto chapter. And she is also a recipient of the Derek Murdoch Award for service to the Crime Writers of Canada. She's a member of the Mesdames of Mayhem, of which we have a few members here in this launch. And she's also a member of the Deadly Dames critique group. So thank you very much, Catherine, for all you do for the crime writing community. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about Auntie Beers.
And first of all, I want to tell everybody, and not that this is any surprise to most of you, but Donna, I couldn't have a better publisher. She's absolutely amazing, and I'm also grateful that she's a friend as well as a colleague. So thank you, Donna, for everything you've done for Auntie Beers. I couldn't.
My honor.
Couldn't be happier. Auntie Beers really was stemmed from stories that my mother told me. My mother was a really great storyteller, and she was funny. She was irreverent. She told us all kinds of stories when we were kids, and I loved listening, even though it was just talking about poverty and war and all of those horrible things that happened during her lifetime. She made it just amazing. To me, it was an incredible exotic existence. So some of the stories are definitely from my mother. Some of them are from my Uncle Tom, and some of them are my own experience as a child. And of course, I fictionalized even my mother's stories, which were, of course, told from her perspective, but I exaggerated a lot of them, made some of them into a crime where there wasn't a crime previously, because that's just what I do. I love writing mysteries. And I decided on a series of short stories because it sort of mirrors life. I mean, there's a plot here and a plot there, and it really doesn't have a plot that goes all the way through, except for an actual confrontation that Auntie Beers has toward the end of the book. And of course, I had to do that because I was, I'm a mystery writer, so that's what I had to do. So I just feel that there's sort of plots about people who either there's an internal external struggle and they are forced onto a different path, and just like real life, and so they need to be persistent and try to get through whatever it is that life sort of throws at them. And of course, Auntie Beers was she is an amalgam of all my aunts, my grandmother, my mother. She's a real, mix of all of those strong women who made it through some pretty challenging times, to say the least. So yeah, that's Auntie Beers. And so, I have to get the cigarette and also, because that's what she drank. So if I'm slurring my words by the end of this, I can't even get it out of this, but that's all right. Okay, putting it up, and I already have a certificate from Ireland saying that I pour a great glass of Guinness. So there you go. Here I am pouring the glass of Guinness, and you have to just do half and then wait a while and pour the rest. So I will do that. In the meantime, while that's resting, I will go ahead. I guess, Donnie, want me to go ahead and introduce Meredith?
Yes, yes. Would you do that?
I will. Meredith is my belle-fille, which I think is a much better description than daughter-in-law, because it's not law that that keeps me connected to her. My son was lucky enough to marry her, but she's a writer, she's a producer, she's an actor. She's my angel who took care of me when I was sick. She's my heart, and she's going to be the voice of the audiobook for Auntie Beers once we get everything all straightened out and figure out how to do it. She's also been Shirley Holmes, if you remember that series from a long time ago, and you can find it on YouTube now. She was Shania Twain, but mostly she's Meredith Henderson, an amazing person and extremely talented as well. So Meredith, you're up.
Hey, thank you. I feel really honored to be here. Like Kathy said, we call each other belle-mère and belle-fille because, yeah, she's amazing and I love her. And, I just feel so grateful to have her in my life. And she's a fabulous freaking writer. So, yeah, so here we go. We'll be reading an excerpt from the book. If only the bullet had veered to the right just a smidge, our great aunt would have been awarded the longest to have been a resident of the Queen's Hotel. The very next week, Stu Burnside received the honor instead. It included a case of beer and a gift certificate to Perk's Family Restaurant, both of which Auntie Beers would have appreciated. Sitting here at my desk, I realize now that my great-aunt died the way she lived. Auntie Beers always stood in the middle of if only, when, and then, constantly revising the past in hopes for a different future. If only I'd been rich enough instead of the ravishing beauty that I am, she cackled, tossing a cigarette butt over the porch. When I get that job, I plan to lord it over the rest of you, she declared, dressed in a business suit destined to hang in her closet from that day forth. When my mother dies, sorry to say, but then I'll be free. A pause and a wink, but not sorry. If only the lads had had a brain, we'd have been landowners instead of farm hands, was her critique of male choices in our family. If only the bullet had veered to the right when she got involved in a shooting match. Then she would have been queen of the Queen's Hotel. Auntie Beers had a way of telling a story that compelled my cousins and me to sit at her feet for hours. Ironic, sarcastic, oddly humorous. She told us about life, her own in particular, her view of the world in general, a life that I, a dreamy, imaginative child, thought was colorful and exciting, even as Auntie Beers spoke of poverty, despair, and war. The first time we sat and listened to her stories, Auntie Beers invited us to return. She was convinced she had a lot to teach us. "You can come back next Sunday too," she said. "Skip the catechism and come see your old auntie for the real story." Skipping the classes held after Mass in the basement of the church was incentive enough, not to mention the treats that Auntie Beers always provided. I couldn't get enough of her narrative, the way she told a story, dramatized, held on to the ending, drew out the words. She was a master. In the 1960s, when my cousins and I formed our circle with her, Auntie Beers was considered an old maid, a term we never use anymore. She was technically our great-aunt, older sister to our grandmother. We didn't really know the difference at the time, and no one, as far as we knew, ever referred to Bearbury as great. "Part old maid and part wild child," Auntie Beers said about herself. "Never been married, but often been screwed." Bearbury had slim, long legs, a narrow waist, and full breasts. By the time we were old enough to remember, her lovely red hair was threaded with silver. Add flashing green eyes, and even in her elder years, Auntie Beers was beautiful. She may not have been demonstratively affectionate, nor conciliatory, often intolerant, but she was witty and honest, encircled her family with connections to the past, to history, to the present, and in many ways, the future. We learned to expect the best, but be prepared for the worst. As for me, I took my great-aunt's stories and gave them lives of their own. I became an author of mystery, crime, and fiction. My stories reflect her wicked side, her tender side, her. Before long, the tales bumped up against my life and have become legends of my own.
Brava, Meredith. That was
Yes,
lovely.
indeed.
Thank you.
Very well done.
That was awesome.
It's not hard when you're reading from a great author, so I
You
get happy.
nailed the accent, Mare. I love it. I can't wait to hear the audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce Tom Sullivan, known to many as Uncle Tom. And for those who may not know, Tom and Kathy have co-authored a book titled Uncle Tom's Gabbin', and So Am I. So look for that, because that's just a collection of great fun stories. And Tom is going to read a little excerpt for us as well. So take it away, Tom.
You expect me to follow that? I mean, my goodness. Yes, I'm Uncle Tom. I'm a baby of the Depression era, the 1930s. And in the 1930s, pregnancy was either divine destiny or divine retribution, depending on your marital status. It was incurable and almost inevitable given the lack of access to birth control. God could decide otherwise, but human intervention was prohibited to all but the wealthy and the very adventurous. Within weeks of my birth, Hitler burned the Reichstag, Roosevelt closed the banks, and Edward VIII of England had his affair with an American married woman. Anyway, those were considered the political, economic, and social disasters of the 20th century. And with my father out of work, or earning $14 a week at the most when he was working, my mother's news of the pregnancy was probably considered the biological disaster of equal significance. I guess that's all I have to do. I have other things to say about that. I don't think so. Anyway, that's me covered in relatively few words. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. And I've got a few questions for Kathy, but I also want to invite anyone who knows how to use the chat function. If you've got any questions about the book or about any of Kathy's work, feel free to use the chat, or we will open for a couple of questions later. If you want to ask them verbally instead, that's fine as well. But I just want to start off with a couple of questions. One is that Auntie Beers is quite different from most of your work, and I know this to be true, having read most of your work, which are primarily crime books. Do you consider Auntie Beers to be historical fiction?
Yes, actually, to a certain extent, because there are lots of references to real historical events. So it is definitely historical, but it's not always factual. Sometimes I when I write something about a real setting or a real event, I will sometimes play with it a little bit in terms of time or what actually did occur and so on. So it is historical to a certain extent, and the plots and characters are definitely fictional. But I do have some quotes from real people. So, there's definitely, it's a real hybrid. So it doesn't really fit into one category. It's kind of partly historical fiction, but it's also got crime mixed in there. It's also maybe what you might call what they refer to as literary mystery, meaning
yes, it's definitely literary.
Focus mostly on the characters, and not on the actual plot. Yeah, I always have to have some kind of crime in my books, so in my stories. So that's why I chose the connected short stories again, so I could veer off really into any direction at all.
And like my Irish ancestors would say, never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Exactly. Yes, I love that quote.
My next question is, what was your purpose in writing Auntie Beers?
It probably sounds terrible, but I really wanted to demonstrate that although human beings are often cruel to one another, there's a resilience in people that keeps all of us going. So we might not consider Irish Catholics when we think of something like genocide, but what happened to them during the Great Famine actually fits a lot of the definition of genocide. And yet they were able to recover culturally, economically, and it did take a long time, it seems, but even the Irish language is making a comeback. So I think that my ancestors, on my mother's side at least, showed a real strength, and it's similar to our Indigenous peoples' determination to survive and to claim back their culture. And so I really did write it with that in mind. It was uppermost in my mind.
My next question has to do with research, and I see here that Meredith has also piggybacked on the same question, so I'm going to ask it in her words rather than mine. She says she would like to know how long it took to research and verify the stories, lingo, and history for the book. And just to preface that, each story has at least a touch of actual history that would have had to be researched. So can you let us know about that, Kathy?
Yeah, well, I was really lucky to have primary sources. I mean, I had my uncle, I had my mother, I had letters from a great aunt, I had newspaper articles, and I had made 4 different visits to Ireland, where I met with various relatives. So they were all, so I was, really there with those sources. So that part of the research was in, almost ingrained in me. And then the secondary sources, of course, all the books and documentaries, movies. So I did spend. I mean, Auntie Beers was kind of the germ of it was years ago. So many years ago. What way before my mom passed away. Way before my great aunt passed away in Ireland. So I mean, honestly, I would say probably, well, when Cindy and I went to Ireland the first time, I think it was like 40 years ago. So it did, the research did take a very long time. But it was just spread out. It was just the germ of an idea for a long time.
How essential do you think the research is to each of the stories? Because I would think it has to feel kind of ingrained in you by the time you write.
Definitely. And, I think research is essential to any novel. It doesn't really matter if it's historical or not, or supposed to be historical. I mean, if you say that the sound of a bird in the background, if that bird doesn't exist in the setting that you have chosen, or it wouldn't be around at that time of year, you will hear from a reader who will say, that bird couldn't have been making that sound. So even if you consider something a trivial point, you still have to do research on it. So every time you write a sentence, almost, you got to check back, make sure that fits. So for me, it takes a long time, because not only will I go and try to prove my point or disprove it, or have to make a different decision, I'll get lost in the research sometimes, and I'll start, oh, this is a really good documentary on Ireland or whatever. And I'll be kind of gone for an hour when it really should have taken 5 minutes. So yeah. I do think research was essential to this novel, but I do think it's essential to any novel.
Yeah, I think really basically you're either world building or you are world researching as a writer.
Yes.
And in our little group, we've got a number of writers who do a lot of research. Melody Campbell, Marilyn Kay, Madeline Harris Coway, and also Rosalind Place. All have done works that required a lot of research. And,
yep.
So we feel you.
Yeah. Yeah. I know too. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we do have some audience questions, and we also have a comment. Melody Campbell says, Kathy, I wanted to say that to me, you are Alice Munro with a glorious, wicked sense of humor. This book demonstrates that. I heartily agree with that comment. Thank you very much, Melody.
Yeah.
And
I can't speak to that.
There is another question here. How do you, as a writer-publisher, determine the best release timing window for your story? Do the story arcs have relevance ties to any current events or developing events in our world these days? I'm going to start answering that, and then I'll turn it over to Kathy. For many works, yes, timing is important. You can have a work where there are relevant things going on in the world, and you want to ride that cusp. So in those cases, even if you started the work long before these particular things happened, you want to try and get it out and ride that cusp. I'm not sure whether that applies in that way with Auntie Beers. I think Auntie Beers may have been more of one of those things that just percolates and percolates and is timeless. But Kathy, I'll let you answer how you feel about that.
Oh, I agree, Donna. And actually, I was just going to turn that question over to you anyway. But I do, listen to advice, especially, from my publisher, for example, about the timing. But you're right. Sometimes the timing is based on your own personal need to get the book out because I certainly experienced that this time. And I think Auntie Beers hopefully is, touches enough human experience that timing wouldn't really matter. It could come out at any time. I hope that's the case for Auntie Beers, at least. Like, it doesn't really, because it fits into so many niches, it doesn't really, hopefully it doesn't really matter when it came out.
That's right. For some authors, for some works. I know that Rosemary McCracken is here, for example, and for some of her works, there might be something going on socially at this moment that absolutely fits a work. I'm thinking of one like Safe Harbor. And if you're lucky enough to actually, and I don't know, Rosemary, whether you did manage to hit that tide, but if you're lucky enough to hit the tide of something going on socially that actually impacts your work, it's a wonderful thing. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes the work just needs to be done and presented regardless of whether it seems to be good timing. So
yeah.
Do we have any other audience questions?
Well, I'll do one. So you said before that Auntie Beers is like an amalgam of your aunts and family members and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, oh my goodness, sorry, my computer is doing weird things. I'm wondering how much of an amalgam is she, and like how much did she become her own character? And if she did, how did that feel in terms of when you were writing her, and how did she morph in ways that you didn't expect, or was it like planned, or like how? Because I feel like that could be a very interesting journey to be, especially with something to do with your own family. There's paying homage and these people that you love. So I was just interested about that journey of creating this character, but who was based on, such influential people in your life.
It was an interesting journey, because you're right. She eventually morphs into her own character and does and says things that I didn't expect. And
Cool.
It's that sort of subconscious thing that happens, and all the writers here can attest to this. It's an amazing event in your life, or experience in your life, when it's almost like the character takes on its own life, apart from you and apart from all the people that you're telling the stories about. So she's definitely her own character. She's not, my mother or my aunts or my grandmother, because she's kind of a mean old lady, and none of those people really were mean ladies. I mean, occasionally they were, but she's actually, one of my editors is my cousin, who knew all these people, and she didn't like Auntie Beers at all. She still doesn't like her. She wanted me to change her to be, a little nicer, I guess, would be the way to put it. But Auntie Beers went off on her own. Like she was a pretty mean old lady, but she also had a lot to teach her grand nieces and nephews, and she knew it, and she was going to hammer it into their heads no matter what, whether they wanted to listen to it or not. But yeah, she was. She definitely. It's a really good question, because I know all the writers would feel that too and say,
and she's very relatable, which is the hallmark of a master writer, is that she's very relatable. I don't care what your culture is. Everybody's got an Auntie Beers. Everybody knows an Auntie Beers. She may not be this old smoking, beer drinking, cranky Irishwoman, but she's certainly there, and she's opinionated, and she pushes the buttons of people in the family that wish she'd just kind of shut up or go away.
Yeah.
You know, she tickles the fancy of the people who want to hear what she brings to the table. You know? Yeah.
I'm glad you've said that, because I'm actually starting Auntie Beers for the second time. I got about a third of the way through, and then I got hit with COVID. We were 10 days off. And when I picked it up, I couldn't even remember where the hell I was. So I started again. But she keeps flashing in, like I keep thinking, oh God, that's so-and-so. And then I'd say, who the hell is this person?
Exactly.
Reading on and off. So she's quite a fascinating character. I mean, in a way, you can't like her, but you also can't hate her. I mean, she's there and she's kind of filling the role, whether you want it to be filled or not, you know. She's a great character. I think it took real genius to come up with her.
She is a fabulous character, and it is a wonderful book. It cusps on the literary. So if you are someone who enjoys literary stories, as Melody said, very Alice Munro-like in that way, not always nice, but always relevant and relatable, and very well told. The other mark of an excellent writer is somebody who can use dialogue in an extremely natural way. And Kathy really has got that too. I want to make sure everybody knows how to find information about Kathy and her work. You can certainly go to Catherine Astolfo's Amazon bio. Just look up Catherine Astolfo and find her author page. You can find a lot about Kathy at the Mesdames of Mayhem website, which is mesdamesofmayhem.com. You can find about Kathy at her own site. Catherine, what is your website called?
Well, actually, my granddaughter is working on a new website. So,
okay. So go to the other places first.
Yeah, go to those other places.
Yeah. The good thing about the Amazon.com Catherine Astolfo author page is that you can find all of Kathy's other works that we've talked about, which are exceptional. Kathy really is a writer of our times, in my opinion. And so I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned where you can find Kathy. If you've got any questions about Kathy and you know her personally, feel free to reach out to Kathy directly. If you don't know her personally, feel free to write me at Carrick Publishing at Rogers.com and just say in the subject line, questions about Kathy. And I'll be sure to get Kathy in touch with you about it, okay? I really want to thank everybody for coming. And special thanks to Tom Sullivan and Meredith Henderson for reading excerpts and talking a little bit about the work. And a great big thanks to Catherine Astolfo for joining us and giving her time so generously today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here.
Dusty road, man alone. vital signs go on hold. And I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. And I told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free. Yet it rides